Hey, what's up, everybody? This is an open discussion with C3 Films. My name is Chris, and this is.
Cheryl.
And today we're going to be talking about the movie Sardar Udham. It is on Amazon Prime, and we are going to be going into spoiler territory. It is about a 2 hour and 42-minute movie. And there's a lot to talk about. So if you haven't seen the movie, it's on Amazon Prime, included with a subscription. So go ahead and watch it there, and then come back here and see what we have to say about it. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump right into this. So the whole reason that we even are talking about this movie is because when we did our review or discussion on RRR, we had a couple of people in our comment section come in and recommend a couple other movie choices that they wanted us to watch. And so this was one of the ones that got consistently repeated. And so we decided that we would go ahead and decide to check the movie out. We didn't know anything about it. We didn't watch any trailers. We went into this movie completely blind. And wow, like, what a film. So let's go ahead and just talk about like how we felt about it, what you thought, like what was your experience going through it. But let's start with you, Cheryl, and just say what did you have any expectations going into this, and did this movie kind of just surprise you?
Well, I kind of had a discussion with one of our commenters on our YouTube, so I kind of had an idea that it was based on a true story, but that's pretty much it. And I also knew that it wasn't going to be like your typical Bollywood. It was suggested also because it wasn't the stereotypical Bollywood movie with the music, and it's not a masala genre made movie. So that's also another reason why I think a bunch of people recommended it to us, and I really appreciate it because I actually really enjoyed this movie. It really like oof, right there in the heart. I do also want to say, as promised, I watched all the opening credits and I read everything. I promised I did it. And I also want to say that I do apologize that I fast forwarded the opening credits for RRR. It was a little hypocritical of me because I used to watch the credits for like every movie that I would go to a theater to watch. So I completely understand why it's important that you watch credits. So, but moving on from that, gosh, there's so much to say about this movie. I was super surprised that we started off like I think it's about 25 minutes in is when O'Dwyer dies.
Yep.
And
happens really quick.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, because I thought that's how the movie was gonna end, because that's kind of what the backstory was for the explanation at the beginning, and so my big question was, what is the story gonna be about? Like, what are we, what are the next 2.5 hours going to be about if they had already just showed us the ending? But this happens a lot in filmmaking, having like Hangover and like all these other movies. It starts at
like
the end.
Noir films, like from back in the day, they basically start with a murder, and then the movie is about like how we got there.
Yeah. And it does mess around a lot with, non-linear storytelling, and that's not exactly how I like to watch my movies.
I was going to bring that up in a moment.
Yeah, Chris knows, because I bring it up a lot when we watch stuff that doesn't happen in a linear format. And it's not because I don't like it, it's because it's not always done well. It was a little bit hard for me to follow at the beginning because there was a lot of jumping around, and we were still establishing everything, but it sunk in real quick. And then it became kind of a unfolding of how this man got to the point of killing O'Dwyer. And the beauty of this film, I think, and the one thing that I want to like really applaud at why it's so masterful is because it starts with the end and it ends with the beginning. And that I think is an incredible way to set up the story. And at first I wasn't sure why they had done it that way, but it really wasn't until I saw the end with the actual massacre, and I was like, Oh my God. I was crying. I was crying watching this movie. It was so, impactful. And the amount of time that they spent on the actual, not the massacre, but with our hero, our main character, Udom, bringing all the survivors out. And it started with him looking for his lady friend, to I need to save as many people as I can, and he keeps going back and back and back, and every time is not a repeat. It's not the same every time. It's a different emotion, it's a different feeling, it's a different encounter, it's a different experience of who he's saving or not able to save. And it was a really long scene, and like that had gone on for a good chunk of the movie, yet it was just so like I needed to see this. And it was so I mean there are no words. I've run out of words to explain how I feel.
Well, good, because you kind of jumped all over the movie. So, as far as being able to respond to things, I now have to like pick and choose. There's stuff I obviously want us to talk about. We are going to talk about the massacre. I think first, the third thing I want to like piggyback off of you on was the nonlinear storytelling, because I remember when I saw that that was how the movie was going to progress. The immediate first thought I had was, I wonder if Cheryl's going to be able to follow this movie, and that's not to like any like diss on Cheryl or anything else like that, but I just know like we all have our strengths when it comes to like things that we're able to like easily retain or follow. And most of the time with movies like this, it's not just Cheryl's not the only person that would get confused. Like other people could get confused, because the other thing this movie does is that what it doesn't do is drop like timestamps. So it doesn't constantly remind you this is where we are. What it does do, which is cool when movies like this do this, is it uses how the character looks and certain points in time as a reference point, and that's how you can know where in the story we are. And that's what this movie does. Like, I want to say, I might be forgetting, but I want to say there are like predominantly 3 points in time that we end up seeing throughout this film, and whatever the present is, you can like argue, but let's just say like the present day is him being on trial or leading up to his death and discovering what brought him here. The other time that we get to see is the time where he spent leading up to him doing the deed, and then the time when he's back in India and stuff happens. The whole massacre stuff happens, and that's all reserved for predominantly the end of the film. And you mentioned, Cheryl, how that was effective storytelling, and even asking the question why they did that. And the whole reason is because they want you to see the act first. There's definitely some sense of a political message here, but part of it is that they want you to see the act first. They want you to see him do the deed and how everybody talks about it, how he is treated, how certain labels are put on what he is and what he's doing. And you as the viewer, like, because he's the main character, you have the feeling that what he did was right. Plus, they literally have the guy say that it is the burden of the white man to like take care of places like Africa and India. And most logical people aren't going to feel like great about hearing that. So when you see him die, like immediately following that line, you don't necessarily like feel sorry for the guy, but how he is framed is then important. The language that's used to describe him, what he did, who he is, and for all intents and purposes, you as the viewer have no reason to doubt that what they're saying is true. Like, you understand that this guy did something in the past that resulted in Udom being this way in the present, but the weight of it isn't felt on you. So you don't really fully understand. And the movie then proceeds to slowly build up that rage that is within him in you as a viewer, so that by the end you completely understand why he did what he did. And that is like one of the most brilliant aspects of the story, is allowing you to slowly understand the emotion behind it, because in the beginning you do not have that emotion. You are not connected to what, like, the reason he has to do it the same way that he is. You just have an abstract understanding. But the reason that last scene is so long, that last scene is like 30 minutes. Like, from the point that they pull the guns out to the point that the last body is picked up and we're back in the present, it is like a full 30 minutes. So the movie wants you to feel it. It wants you to feel how grueling it is for him, because it's grueling for you. You are forced to sit there and see him pick up each and every body. See him, like, try to save children and have to lie to people that are dying that the children are still alive. And you see him have to, like, see people that he saved still die even though he tried to save them. And the weight of that, and it's like, now all of a sudden you're thinking back on the movie and you're like, oh yeah, he had to do this. He literally had no other choice but to do this, because what else could he have done after all of that? He didn't even find his friend. He started off looking for his friend, and at least for the movie, what we see, he doesn't even find her. So it's absolutely crazy. And I remember thinking when the movie began and it opens by saying there was a massacre, but they had it in the text. I remember thinking to myself, oh, this is great. It's in the text. I won't have to see this because I don't need to see it. And then they had it in the end of the movie, and I was like, okay, I did need to see this, but I needed to be prepared, because I kind of connect in a different way with, like, hard actions like this. And it was a very hard movie for me personally to get through, because I felt the kind of way, and I usually feel the kind of way for any type of movie like that's connected to racism on any scale.
Yeah, and I'm gonna try not to cry during this episode because and I don't usually cry when I watch stuff. I'm just saying. But, like, knowing that this was real, that this actually happened, is, like, crazy. But, like, everything you said is exactly right. Like, it's such a parallel to have seen, like, okay, he just goes and he shoots this one guy, and that's, like, not even brutal. But then when you know, and it's like, whatever. I didn't even flinch when I watched it. But it's also, like, the way that it was shot, right? But I mean, that aside, there's less brutality in one man shooting another man than there is in one man commanding another man to command all these other people to shoot innocent people who are literally doing nothing, just gathering. And, you know, I actually looked up I tried to read up a little bit more about, like, the real events, and they had actually shot all the bullets until they ran out of ammunition, and that's why they stopped shooting. And this had gone on for, like, 8 to 10 minutes or something of just them shooting, and there's only one exit in that area, and they were blocking it. So, like, that's just completely awful. And, like, that's the thing about, you know, so I'm trying not to cry. But that's, like, the thing about these kinds of movies that are based on true stories and stuff, is because it does exactly what it, like, needs to do, which is to get people to be informed.
Yeah.
Because if I had never
People
watched
don't know.
this movie, I would have never known that this. I'm not from India. This is not in our history books.
No.
And I'm sure that it is in India. I mean, I'll have to ask my my friends, and, you know, about this, and if they had seen this, and, you know, I kind of want to pick their brain about all of it. But I mean, that's kind of what his mission was, which is to, you know, and I wrote down in my notes, like, he had so many chances to kill this guy, but he did it. So he had to have picked this moment for a reason, and his reason was to make it into a public statement, to make a public uproar, and that's what it did, or tried to do, even though they tried to suppress the media and such. And I think that, you know, in a sense, they were probably still pretty successful about it, because I don't think this is a very widely known thing. But also, I'm not British, so I don't know if it's in their history books either.
Well, I just to have a point of comparison though, like, there are very many people that did not know, like within our even our own history books, there are things that we don't know. Like there are people that don't know about the Tulsa massacre, and they only found out about the Tulsa massacre because it's the backdrop of Watchmen, and that's literally the only reason people know about it. But me and you grew up in the U.S. I grew up in the South. You grew up in California, and even though we're both of us on opposite ends of the same like country, neither one of us had heard about this horrific event. And so it's kind of part of the course, unfortunately, for our society. But yeah, it's no surprise we never heard of this thing that happened in another country that neither one of us like have ever been to.
Yeah.
So
it's really shameful that this is the way that we have to, make history known. But that's also why, it's so important to have movies like these so that people can be informed. Even though it's just based on a true story, it still led to, us being knowledgeable of something that had actually happened. And then, you have people like me that like to actually go and try to look up and see what actually happened. Mm-hmm. It was definitely suppressed in Britain. They had said that 300 something people died, but the reality of it is it was probably closer to 1,000 or more. Yeah. So and I believe that. When I read 300 something, I was like, no way.
Doesn't sound right.
Yeah, I don't buy that one bit. But yeah, but I mean, just the story in general, and I'm curious. So if you're listening out there, I'd really like to know if anyone knows what his real name is. Chris and I were talking earlier about how I don't think they had ever mentioned the word or the name Sardar, just Udham Singh. So I'm wondering, and he even says in the movie that his name is something else, but he also had all these other identities. So if anyone out there is knowledgeable about this occurrence in history, would be interesting. I'd like to hear what all of you have to say out there about it, and what his real name actually was.
One thing I also wanted to talk about briefly was like the level of commitment that he had to have in order to do this. Like when we first see him do it at the beginning of the movie, we don't fully grasp how long it took to get here. Like they say 6 years, so we do know that it took some time, but we don't know what was he doing. And the movie kind of documents what he was doing during that time, like what led up to him getting to the point where he was able to kill this guy. And at one point, he's actually working for him. Like he's working for him. Like you said, he had plenty of opportunities. And like you said, he was worried that it would just be seen as a dispute between employee and employer. But the other thing about it was that it almost felt like he was trying to give the guy a chance to just like say I'm sorry, or to like see if he was bent out of shape about it, or if it was something that haunted him. And I think that's like one of the one of the saddest parts about this entire movie was the fact that this man had no remorse. And when you hear how he's talking about these people and also this event, and you see how Udham is trying to like have a conversation about it, but not give away too much, but also trying to he's almost like giving the guy, hey, here's the answer to the question that I'm asking. Was this terrible? Yes, the answer is yes. But it almost feels like he's trying to feed it to him. It's just like, well, this was kind of bad, right? And the guy's like, well, it wasn't that bad. And then he's like, but women and children died, right? And that's bad. And he's like, well, no, blah, 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 blah. It's almost like he's really trying to like have this guy just say, hey, this was terrible and I feel terrible about it. But the guy, like Dowry, like that's his name, Dowry or something?
Dwyer. Oh, Dwyer.
Dwyer. I always forget his name. I've done that like 5 times. But Dwyer, like he feels nothing. He has no remorse. And because of that, it's like, well, then, you know what? There's no reason to have remorse for killing him. And at that point, when we see that he doesn't have remorse, it's still all dialogue. We don't know what happened. We didn't see what happened. We just know that people died. And so when you get to the end of the movie and you see that massacre take place, even more so, you're like, he doesn't have remorse for this? Like, wow. wow, and it just really drives it home. So yeah, like it definitely feels very similar to Memento in that way, where you kind of get the end of the story at the beginning, and then you slowly figure out what led up to it. But yeah, obviously Memento's structure is very different than this. But that that form of storytelling, I don't see it done effectively that much, and that's why it's not used that much. I think because I think it's a very challenge, and people are afraid that audience members won't be able to follow it. So it makes it so that people don't even try it at all. But this is definitely very strong a strong way to tell a story, but also to make a point, which I think absolutely there's no way that this movie was made without trying to make without a point that it had to make. And I do
Mm-hmm.
feel like that point was made, at least for me it
Yeah.
was.
I mean, I tried to imagine watching this in a linear way, starting with the massacre, and I'd be like, well,
Leading up.
there's no way they can make the first 30 minutes of this massacre, and Udom bringing all these people to the doctor and everything. No way. It would probably be like 5 minutes tops or something like that, and then the rest of the story would be about like him, you know, or actually, what is that? No, yeah. Then the rest of the story would be him planning the plot of how he's gonna assassinate O'Dwyer, and then the trial, and he's convicted and hanged, and that's it. Like, what a boring movie. I would not want to watch it in that way, for sure. I mean, it was just so powerful the way that they shot the scene. It was just perfection. I was completely captivated by it. And it was hard to watch, like, but I couldn't look away at the same time. Like, it was horrible. It was horrific, but it was almost like I needed to see
I
it.
need to see it.
I needed to see it. And then when he walks into the area, and he just like he stepped on all those bullet casings, and there's just piles of it, and he's just like looking at it, like that there said so much because of how many bullets were fired. Like I mentioned, I read they shot until they couldn't shoot anymore. That's just beyond belief, and that just goes to show you like how things really were back then. Like it was so easy for people to be that gruesome, and you would think that people had kind of grown up by now and not, you know, I mean, I something like that I feel like couldn't really fly nowadays. But I mean, I think you'd also be surprised. I think we just don't get to know because things are always suppressed and like hidden from us. But he'd also mentioned something about not wanting 1857 to happen all over again. So I looked that up briefly, and it was another uprising from the Indians wanting freedom and independence from the British.
Hmm.
And I'm just like, I don't think I've ever really seen the British painted this way. And I mean, I don't know why, because we were a colony, the US was a colony, and we didn't like them, but now we're like BFFs. So it's like now we don't really see them in a bad way. We're actually painted to envy them, like they have beautiful accents and everything like that, and they're just kind of seen somewhat superior to our culture because we have like redneck hicks and stuff like that, and hillbillies or whatever. And that's kind of how America is seen. Um, but it really
Yeah.
isn't like that. But it's just really interesting to be able to see them this way, and kind of reminded me about my family, being from Singapore, and how they were occupied by the Japanese, but they were a colony of the British, and such
Mhm.
like that. And so it just kind of made me think about how things were back then and how different it is now, but also not different. It's really just what we're shown is
What
what
we're
we
told and what we
yeah
choose to believe.
yeah. And
Yeah.
this is such a great, and I'm so glad that it's on Amazon for like everyone to watch. I don't know
Yeah. If you
why.
have Amazon Prime, it's free. You don't even have to pay money for it.
Yeah, so
It's
this is
included.
the kind of movie. This movie. I'm telling everyone that they need to see this.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that I thought was interesting within the movie is that like the detective who is interviewing him almost feels like the audience in a way, because the detective kind of comes in not really knowing anything, and the same way that it is recontextualized for us watching the movie, the events that led up to this the death of like or him killing this guy is also recontextualized for the detective. And you get this idea as he learns more, he kind of almost feels for him, and there's almost like a level of understanding. They have this conversation that's very well done where where he tells him, "Hey, I don't hate you. You're just doing your job. You know, I can't hate you. You're in your country and you're doing your job." And there's like a lot of good scenes like that where it's just these conversations that are about like I remember when he first meets Eileen, she tells him, you know, to fight for the world. And I laughed when I heard that because I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, of course, fight for the world because like you're in a good position right now and this other person who's not needs to fight for the world because that's what you're fighting for. But no, his situation is not the same as you. So you can't say that to him. He's got to fight for himself and his people first, and then we can worry about the world. And I like that he said that, like, because that's immediately what I thought, because I got frustrated when I heard her say that. I was like, oh my God, I hate that. But he says to her, he's like, I'm not free. You're free. We're not equal. When we are equal, then I can fight for the world. And I was like, yeah, 100%. I can't even, like, argue with that. But I, you know, and we try to not get like, you know, go into like two things like topics that could be too touchy when during our talks on YouTube. So we're gonna stay away from like most of that talk here. But what I will say is that the way that he was recontextualized did get me wondering about certain events within our own history and how that could be recontextualized if we had certain other information, because the people within this time frame would have only had the information that was given to them by their own government and newspapers, and therefore they had every right to believe that this man was 100% in the wrong. But giving more information, you realize that it's not quite that simple. And so it did get me literally thinking after the movie, once the credits were rolling, how true that was for some of the things, some of the perceived truths that we have based off of the events that have happened in our lifetime. So I'll leave it at that, but I really did enjoy the relationship that kind of built between the detective and Udham within the film, and how by the end, the detective even felt like he was kind of saddened by Udham's death. And I just feel like that was kind of like a representation of how even the audience felt watching this film, because I knew that it was based on a true story, but I remember thinking to myself, I want him to live. I want him to live. Tell me something happened where they didn't kill him, but it's real life. That's what happened. And so it is kind of sad, but his memory lives on and lived on, and he did what he was meant to do. And I love that. The last thing I wanted to bring up was I love the fact that he has this conversation where he's talking about how youth is a gift, and you can either let it like wither, or you can like make it mean something. Like, I'm loosely paraphrasing. And I love how he's saying, like, when I die, I'll get to the man upstairs and I'll ask him, did I make my youth worth it, or something like that. And I was like, man, it's great. It's like, it's also very well written. It's, on top of the fact that it's based on a true story and like the way it's shot and everything, and like we talked about the structure, like even just the dialogue within it is very well written.
Absolutely, I agree. All the things that you had just mentioned, it like there were a lot of things that he had said, especially like that youth one. It definitely made me stop and think, like, you know, did I squander my youth? And I'm like, yeah, probably. But I mean,
You're still young, so not yet. Remember, still young. We're still considered youthful. So
I don't know my back, but. But no, like there are a lot of like deep, well thought out pieces of dialogue in this movie, and like each time I'm just like, I want to write this down so I could like remember it forever. And like what you were saying about his relationship with the detective, I also really enjoyed that, because I feel like it started off with him as being like the bad guy interrogating him, and by the end of the movie they're like friends. He brings him desserts that he knows he likes, and it's like his last meal, and he's like, you know, kind of, is there anything else that I can do for you? And he's like, I just felt like at least in the movie, it felt like Udom was, ready. He was good to go. He's like, I did what I need to do, and now I can go. Um, I fulfilled my destiny and stuff like that. But there's this one quote that he wrote. I mean, I don't know why I wrote this one down, but it felt important, and I really liked that they had said this in the movie, which is that when a person commits a crime, then they quote the law. But when the country commits a crime against another country, then like it's nothing, right? So, and it's stuff like that. Those are the kind of quotes that are in the movie that really make me go, "Wow, that's some deep stuff right there."
Absolutely. And, we're coming up on time here, but was there anything else that you kind of wanted to say for our YouTube segment?
Nope, I'm good.
But yeah, I mean, if you guys want to hear us talk about this and more, you guys can check us out on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/C3Films. It'd be great to see you over there. We continue our talks more past what we put on YouTube for sake of trying to keep the time down. But yeah, that's what we thought of of Sardar Udham. Like, we really enjoyed the film, and we also learned something, which is kind of like one of the best things you can do with a movie is like entertain and inform. But what did you guys think about the film? Did you enjoy it? Was it too much for you? Did you think that the politics, were you not really about it and you didn't really want to know about it? But did you think that it was well told, and now, do you feel even more informed than you were before, kind of like how we feel? Whatever you thought about it, comment below, let us know. And while you're down there, if you give us a like, share, and subscribe, even if you don't though, I have been Chris, and this has been
Cheryl, and we'll see you all next time.